Welcome to the North American Climate Justice Team's webinar, A Just Transition Leaves No One Behind. What? There's more? I'm Susan Oxley from Seattle, Washington, and our topic last month highlighted many of the ways that fossil fuel usage negatively impacts the health of people everywhere. We shared stories of marginalized populations who bear the brunt of industrial waste, air pollution, and corporate practices. People who are left behind economically even when solutions are being considered. This week, we continue our focus on creating a just transition away from fossil fuels. Our dependence on and addiction to fossil fuels divides society in a lot of ways besides health. Yes, there's more, much more. So be prepared. I'm going to quickly summarize a broad sweep of topics to provide an overview of a just transition and the kinds of people we need to consider carefully as we reduce fossil fuels. Rod, Joan, and Andrew will share some stories highlighting specific areas of interest. And you'll have an opportunity to mention people you know who are involved in the transition away from fossil fuels. As usual, send your questions to the chats as we go along. Now, one of the key elements in moving to sustainable energy is divesting from businesses, banks, and corporations that want to increase the extraction of fossil fuels. We want to move away from that. Paul will explain divesting, followed by another opportunity for comments and stories before Lori closes off our webinar. So sit back and hold on to your hats as I gallop through a summary of those who could be left behind if we just transition without making a just transition. The entire sweep of history is a record of humankind's march toward progress. Who has benefited and who's been left behind in the process? Conflicts among communities have always created winners and losers both locally and globally. Colonialism reinforced that tendency. Europeans explored and took over indigenous lands, pushing indigenous people out. Slavery arrived. The Industrial Revolution sentenced people to sweatshops and factories. Railroad construction resulted in virtual slavery for others. As fossil fuel usage increased, the benefits led to a consumer economy, while costs to marginalized people increased. Industrialized societies demanded cheap energy without consequences. That resulted in sacrifice zones and disposable people. The fossil fuel industry created an energy system that is monopolized, rather than replenishable and freely available to everyone, like wind, water, and sun. Manufacturing, mining, and oil industries grew by exploiting workers, ignoring their rights, and disregarding pollution. But decreasing fossil fuels can also leave people behind. Creating climate solutions hastily and without compassion does indeed have the potential to leave marginalized communities behind. Policy decisions must include the voices of those most likely to be affected. Jobs, heritage, and even cultures can be lost as fossil fuel industries shut down. Workers who lose their jobs will need safety nets, retraining, and support if they face waiting periods without incomes. Employee protection and healthcare will be critical in these situations, particularly in the most vulnerable geographies such as Africa. Solutions can be so expensive that only the wealthy can benefit.
As Jeannie said earlier, the last amen is not the last amen.
That's true. Solutions can inflate housing prices, causing former residents to have to move to avoid higher taxes, insurance, and living expenses. That's why we have to work toward a just transition, not just any transition. This is a chance to rethink and rebuild how finite natural and human resources are used. This is an opportunity to move toward renewable and sustainable energy resources that are not finite. Here are the folks who could potentially be left behind if we simply make a transition and not a just transition. Take a look at these 6 categories. Smallhold farmers, people threatened by food insecurity, indigenous peoples, forest management, transportation and construction workers, fossil fuel industrial workers, small fisheries, those most impacted by industrialization, climate events, and unjust green solutions. Miners, pipeline workers, oil rig crews, and others dependent on the fossil fuel industry are at risk of losing their jobs. Now, Rod Downing and Andrew Fellows will share information about this sector later in the webinar today. Renewable energy is a chance for railroads to rethink how they run trains. Solar panels installed at stations along tracks or on train roofs generate clean energy to power operations. Wind turbines located along railroad corridors also contribute to the energy supply. The U.S. railroads still favor fossil fuels, despite the fact that electric trains are quieter, more reliable, and produce fewer greenhouse gases than diesel locomotives. But successful transitions are occurring. Caltrain's busiest commuter rail system in the western U.S. has shifted to electrified trains, reducing black carbon pollution and improving air quality in 6 weeks. Switzerland and Japan have already electrified the majority of their rail networks. Germany has launched trains that run on hydrogen and emit only water vapor. As big railroads move fewer carloads of coal, their networks have surplus capacity to handle new business growth. Now, the problem is, this puts them in competition with highway trucks. So what's being done to assist the truckers? Well, the good news is that in 2021, the U.S. Department of Energy began increasing efforts to modernize heavy and medium-duty trucks that haul our food, our consumer goods, and virtually everything else. This includes cutting costs on producing trucks, getting more electric trucks on the road, improving battery technologies, reducing engine emissions, and lowering the cost of clean hydrogen. The bad news is that massive cuts in the Department of Energy now threaten these goals. But some corporations are picking them up and moving on. Literally. Building flood defenses, upgrading transportation systems, and retrofitting buildings are driving increased demand for construction experts, urban designers, and environmental consultants. But clean energy's demand for skilled construction labor is outstripping the supply. What's needed are improved internal training programs, challenging apprenticeships, partnerships with unions and community colleges, and better recruiting tactics. The clean energy workforce needs to attract more women, more workers of color, and other underrepresented groups, and provide ongoing support once they are hired. Let's look at smallhold farmers. Uzbekistan is the second largest tomato producer in Central Asia. But sharp weather fluctuations and the resulting increase in disease and insect populations have caused a decrease in income for farmers, while production costs increased. Trying to shift from chemical to organic fertilizers and pesticides, and trying to utilize sustainable greenhouse and farming techniques without proper knowledge and training can add more difficulties. To meet these needs, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN provides field training in sustainable agriculture, irrigation management, pest control, and disease prevention. They also provide additional training in sustainable post-harvest packaging, transportation, and sale of crops. Those least likely to cope with food insecurity can be left behind. In the Pacific Islands, traditional crops such as taro and cassava are threatened by changing rainfall patterns and saltwater intrusion into previously fertile land as the seas rise. For island families living a subsistence lifestyle, crop failure is catastrophic. In 2017, the Federated States of Micronesia began to equip the people of the low-lying islands with knowledge, skills, and techniques to maintain a healthy island diet in a changing environment. They used local knowledge to offer workshops in water management and to improve sustainable farming methods, introduce climate-resilient crops, and adapt traditional food processing and preservation. Sustainable forest management, according to the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, includes some of these things: respect for the rights and sovereignty of tribal nations and indigenous peoples through early and ongoing collaboration and co-stewardship of cultural and natural resources. Protection for water quality, aquatic habitat, old growth, and habitat for threatened and endangered species. Sourcing wood products sustainably to create jobs. Ensuring that local communities have a meaningful voice in decision-making and benefit equitably from the outputs derived from them. In 2018, the Blackfeet Nation, located in what is now Montana, produced a Blackfeet Community Climate Health Guide that engages tribal community members and leaders in addressing climate-related health impacts. This collaborative process was community-driven and included all parts of tribal government, while respectfully considering traditional values and a collective community vision for the future. Underlying the plan is the Blackfeet understanding that people and nature are one, and that people can only be healthy if we ensure the health of the environment we are part of. Wildlife are being impacted. Highways often separate wildlife from wintering grounds, watering holes, and food sources. Collisions put both animals and humans at deadly risk. But wildlife bridges and tunnels are providing safe transit across and under highways and danger zones in Colorado. Entire herds of mule deer and elk use the structures, as well as bears, mountain lions, bobcats, coyotes, foxes, and smaller animals. Wildlife crossings can reduce vehicle collisions with large animals by more than 80%. Overfishing issues are connected to multiple environmental issues: the fossil fuel industry, farming sustainability, waste disposal, plastics, and coastal communities around the world. In March of 2025, that's just a month ago, a federal court in Washington, D.C. ruled that a 73 million acre offshore oil and gas lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico violated the law. In short, the oil industry lost, and communities and wildlife that dwell in the Gulf of Mexico won. In Seadrift, Texas, pollution by the Formosa plastics plant poisoned water, fish, and other wildlife. Diane Wilson, a shrimp boat captain, advocated for ending pollution, but it took years to get results. You may remember the webinar where Paul Bethel shared the whole story with you. Check out our April 3rd, 2022 webinar, Systemic Solutions, Issues in Eco-Justice, Going Deeper, Part 2. Communities have borne the brunt of industrialization. Economically disadvantaged residents in southeast Bottoms, Des Moines, Iowa, lived on river bottom land prone to constant flooding. Low flood levees remained were inadequate. Slum landlords kept the residents in poverty, and oppressive bank practices prevented loans. In 1969, Dean and Susie White led a self-help equity project to assist 6 families to build homes. Blocked by bureaucrats, all but one family had moved on before they could build. But one house was finally built, breaking the zoning and redlining barriers and opening the way for more development. Now, added flood controls and improvements, such as community center, pool, and community garden, transformed the bottoms. But wealthy residents moved in, and old residents were unable to afford higher taxes, higher insurance, and higher costs of living. They moved out. Unless we intervene, adaptations and solutions to climate crises will continue to favor the privileged and well-off over the poorer and marginalized groups. To hear the whole story from Dean himself, check out our April 3rd, 2022 webinar, Systemic Solutions, Issues in Eco-Justice, Going Deeper, Part 2. With temperature increases, New York City communities in poor areas like the South Bronx, Washington Heights, and Inwood suffered more health crises. They were hotter than areas of Manhattan less than 5 miles away because of a lack of trees and grass. To help address this disparity, New York City started the Cool Neighborhoods program to plant trees in New York City's urban heat islands. Another project is the Be a Buddy program that engages local residents and organizations to check in on residents who are older, disabled, and living alone on hot days. The volunteers provide wellness checks and empower connections to city services, including food, health care, and air conditioning. Joan Thompson provides an excellent primer on urban heat islands in our March 20th, 2022 Systemic Solutions, Issues in Eco-Justice, Going Deeper. So there you have some of the populations that are most at risk. But I want to point out that a just transition also creates jobs. Jobs in renewable energy, engineers and contractors, data scientists, lawyers, professionals in environmental law and policy, climate finance specialists in banks and insurance. I know that we could put our heads together and add more things to this summary, but this is a beginning. Just to remind you of what is involved in a just transition. Rod is going to share a little more about oil workers during this just transition. Rod?
Thanks, Susan. One of the things I want to make sure you take from that is just transition creates jobs. And to me, that is one of the biggest issues that we have when you step back and say, why are we where we are? Where are we? We're in a world that Susan sort of laid out is one that came from colonialism. Well, not so much from colonialism, the Industrial Revolution, which brought about the benefits because oil was such a dense form of energy, and that was good at the time. But over time, what becomes good starts to have more and more problems. And that's the world we're living in now, where it's got this terrible problem that we can't see but have to deal with called climate change. Yet we've inherited this view that oil is good. It's the only thing that works. So let's stay with that. So my point being, first of all, we've got to recognize this narrative and change it. So that's a bit of my overall summary, that when I get into the details, because I'm going to zero straight in on oil workers, they're the ones that are going to be hit the hardest, and the most. But in behind that is always, how can we change the narrative? It's a first matter of being aware, and then it's a matter of, like Catherine Hayhoe, starting to share it, planting seeds, starting to help other people see the creative nature of us all and how we can make it not simply a transition, but as Susan said, it must be just transition. Okay, so on to my first slide is the oil workers. These are the areas I'll be talking about. And the first, so with oil workers, I've listed a few ways that they can transition in and when I say a just way, I'm speaking primarily of a way that allows them to maintain or have a dignified job. Dignity is a critical issue of well-being. So, and the first thing is the one in yellow. We can't simply stop the spigot of oil. We're not at that point in the transition, so we're still going to need oil workers. Not everybody is going to have to switch off. Primarily, what I would, if it were up to me, it would be the older workers who are harder for them to retrain, have them keep drilling while the others shift. But that's a sense. I've only got a minute or two for each one, so got to keep going. Next slide. The second possibility is geothermal. Now, in geothermal, you're drilling, you're basically taking the same equipment, the same technology, the same knowledge, and if you see on the left slide, you're still drilling 2 holes in the ground, and at the very bottom should actually be a watery mix that is very, very hot, because the farther down you go, the hotter it gets. And geothermal allows you to then spin turbines and make electricity that way. So where it is appropriate, it isn't always appropriate in all areas. Geothermal is a wonderful renewable fashion. Everything has its pluses and minuses, but geothermal is a good thing. And for oil workers, they don't have to learn anything else. They just switch, they just move their equipment to where geothermal makes sense. Okay, next slide. The second possibility is to clean up oil sites, abandoned oil sites. So the oil workers already know all about the oil sites, but for some reason, we let all the oil companies do, put in, okay, sure, put in all the oil wells you want in your land, but when the oil stopped, they just disappeared. I don't know, like, how did that happen? Well, it's because we were still in that old mental state of, well, oil is the way things go, so we'll just let these oil wells, rust away. But they don't simply rust away. They're leaking methane and things like that is creating even more pollution. Well, that's got to be addressed. There's 2 to 3 million of these in the US. So there is a terrific job for a lot of oil workers. They've got the understanding, they just need to clean it up. So, boy, you want to write to your representatives, there's something you can talk about. All right, next one. So the next 2 then do require retraining. So that should be the younger workers. And the first one is to retrofit buildings. The one on the left, you can see there's all kind, you can't see the dots, but there's about 10 different things you can do for retrofitting, all of which, and I'll give you a quick example for me. When I moved into the place I'm in now, it was a 35-year-old building. The attic had minimal insulation, so we simply got this company. They put a big hose in, spewed out cellulose-like stuff. It's a healthy stuff. It's not damaging or anything. They've learned those lessons. We had this big, deep insulation in the roof, our energy bill dropped by a third. That very simple, very cheap, very quick method dropped our energy bill by a third. And that's only one of the 9 or 10 things you can see in that left slide that you can do. What's the right slide? That's showing you that, hey, you don't have to simply use the materials we've got today. There are now all kinds of materials like bamboo, like hemp, and some recycled steel, cork, reclaimed wood, reclaimed plastic, and things like that. There's all kinds of other materials that are much better for the environment and also insulate. So a lot of good things that can be done. Okay, got to move on. Next one. The other possibility is the most obvious one, that is moving to retrain to get into the solar industry, get into the wind industry. Why keep being in the old days, why keep being a blacksmith when you could become an auto mechanic and get into the new world? Well, this is a new, like the printing press. Before you had to write by hand, then you could print things. The computer revolution. Have you seen any encyclopedia salesmen lately? No, everyone gets stuff off the internet. Transitions are always going on. This is simply one of them. Let's make sure it is just. And so if we can get these workers into the solar and wind industry, bingo, they're into the new world rather than the old. So these are the things. First of all, be aware when you encounter people, share non-confrontationally these conversations, and for sure write your government people and say, this is what we want for a just transition. And with that, I'll move it on to the next person.
That would be Joan. It's time for you to unmute.
Yep. Okay. So I'll just get my stuff up here, and I was enjoying Rod so much I wasn't paying attention. So I want to talk to you a bit about farmers. Modern farming requires expensive machinery and massive amounts of petroleum-based inputs. You might have thought, as I did, that when you talk about farmers getting off fossil fuel, it means stop using gas or diesel for your tractor. That's not the issue at all. The average American farm, because of these expensive inputs, runs a profit of only between 10 cents to $3 per acre per year. So it might seem that farmers can't afford to get off fossil fuels, but the exact opposite is true. Now, in the 2020 documentary Kiss the Ground, which has just been re-released on Prime Video, if you have access to Prime Video, as well as the sequel to it, Common Ground, which continues the story, we meet Gabe Brown, a North Dakota rancher who went further into debt each year with traditional modern farming until he switched to regenerative farming in 1999. Then by 2020, using regenerative farming, he was earning a profit of $100 per acre because of increased yield from the more fertile soil, lower costs from not having to put so many sprays and things on his crops, and more resilience to adverse weather and market fluctuations because of growing multiple crops. So it turns out that plants grown on healthy soil can take large amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere and fix them in the soil, sequester them, where it becomes food for the billions of microorganisms that nourish and fertilize plants. Tilling, however, disrupts and weakens the soil ecology, leaving bare ground and blown away topsoil circling the globe. Then the petroleum-based herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides finish the job of killing all those microorganisms, turning soil into dirt. Since the 1970s, we've lost 1/3 of the Earth's topsoil, leading to growing desertification. And the prediction is that there's only enough topsoil if we continue using the same farming techniques for another 55 years. Farmers now have to use more than 3 times as much fertilizer to grow the same amount of grain as they did in 1960 because the soil is so dead. By switching to regenerative agriculture, American farmers could increase their profits by over $100 billion annually. The soil is naturally nourished and regenerated through a combination of cover crops and perennials, urine and dung from periodic animal grazing, moving them through the different fields, and a no-till crop seeding. So globally, a healthy soil environment, if farmers would switch to this regenerative farming technique, that healthy soil environment that is created could hold more carbon, pull it out of the atmosphere and hold it, than currently the atmosphere and plants living on the soil combined. So when it comes to farming, it's continuing with the modern petroleum-based methods that's leaving not just the farmers, but all of us behind. So that's my story, and we'll move it on to the next one.
Andrew Fellows from Great Britain couldn't be with us, but he wanted to share a story about a transition in the steel industry. So here is his submission.
A just transition for steel workers. We will always need steel. For a just transition in the steel industry to have any chance of working, it can take a government to pass a law to bring back control into public hands and then spend huge sums of money keeping it operational. The steel industry contributes 11% of the world's carbon emissions. But electric arc furnaces are now being built, and these will drastically reduce emissions, and is currently the best solution for the steel industry around the world. In the UK, the government stepped in this month to help Scunthorpe Steelworks in the north of England, when its Chinese owners wanted to close it down because it was losing £700,000 a day. The government took control to save the 2,700 jobs and an industry. Government had already guaranteed a sum of £1.25 billion to transition from the coal-powered furnaces to the electric arc furnace. But to create a just transition, to safeguard the 2,700 jobs, the old coal-powered furnaces need to stay in production till the electric arc furnaces are ready, which could take a year and losses of £700,000 a day. Steel factories around the world have not taken this just transition to electric arc furnace. In Port Talbot in South Wales, 2,800 steel workers lost their jobs when a Chinese-owned steel factory recently closed and started their electric arc furnace build. And this is the norm. A just transition for steel workers safeguards jobs while electric arc furnaces are built. Who's next?
Well, thank you all for your stories. That's wonderful. We have just a few minutes, not very long, for some quick stories or comments or questions from all of you participants. So please raise your hands and let's see who. Yes, Michael. Just very quickly, please, just a few sentences.
All right. Hydrogen as an alternative could be dangerous because it's transported in ammonia. Ammonia used in fertilizers causing literally hundreds of square miles of dead spots in the oceans. If people are just dumping their ammonia, it's going to exacerbate that problem.
Thank you. Good point, Michael. Okay, who else has a comment or a story? Yes, Jerry.
We transitioned about 6 or 7 years ago to using hybrid cars. And with being retired and when we're in town, we're always using our battery rather than gas. And so we go months without visiting a gas station, and I think it's worked out excellent for us as a hybrid.
Wonderful, Jerry. Thank you so much. Just out of curiosity, are there any other people who are using electrical vehicles right now? Raise your hands if that's true. Let's just see if there's others. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's look on the other. 6, 7. All right. At least 7 people. That's excellent. I just want to affirm all of those that are already doing that. I don't yet. I don't have an electric vehicle. I'm going to wear mine out before I get a new one, but then it's going to be electric or hybrid. Yeah. Thank you so much. Time for one more story. Somebody else have a comment or a story? What are you doing to help with the just transition? What have you heard about with other people? Yes, David. Unmute yourself and just a few sentences, David, not long.
Sunday, the 20th, Easter Sunday, I had the opportunity to worship in the temple with my granddaughter and her family. And we went to their house after the service, and she was showing me and explaining how they're taking their house that's just about 4 blocks from the temple and totally reworking it. She's put in solar panels already. She's looking to move everything to electricity. So she's doing that complete retrofit of her house to try to get away from gas and oil.
Wonderful, David. Thank you so much. I'm going to just put Lori on the spot. Do you want to make a comment, Lori?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of the disruption of having solar panels installed at my house. So it's been quite a week because it's very noisy, but it's going to be well worth it in the end.
Thank you, Lori. Chantel says her car is hybrid too. Yay. All right. Well, let's move on. I know that I'm pushing you in terms of comments here, but I'm hoping there'll be a few moments after Paul is done. And so I'm going to turn it over to Paul now.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Hope everyone can see a picture of cold people with a sign that says divest.
Yes, we can.
So one of the resolves in World Conference Resolution G5 brings into focus the idea of where and how we invest. And questions have been raised about this. Why does the resolution mention divestment as a strategy to address climate emergency? What's that mean, and how do we go about it? Why does it matter, and why are we getting the church involved? So we want to see if we can kind of chew on some of those questions a little bit. So to start, there's a term used in the nonviolence sector called the 200-year present. And this idea was coined by a sociologist, Elise Balding, and it's a way of kind of thinking about change. There's an artist named Julia Goodman, and she created an artistic representation of this contest or concept that I want to kind of share with you as I tell you about it. So the idea is to consider the present moment as the crux of a 200-year time span. So most of the oldest people that are alive right now either are or are nearly 100 years old. And the very, very youngest among us may live to be 100. So here we are, we stand here in this moment with lives that span a 200-year spectrum. So the Meta Center for Nonviolence says, quote, "It describes a way of thinking of the fleeting present moment with full awareness of the effects of past actions and of our present actions on the future. This perspective encourages a long-term commitment to all life, in which we acknowledge that the past is still with us with its effects, and that all aspects of the present moment, all of our thoughts and actions will determine the future." So I'm the first to admit that, chaos is swirling all around us. And I don't downplay how scary some parts of our current moment are. But for the next 15 minutes or so, let's just kind of take a breath and kind of zoom out and consider ourselves in this moment of time at the crux of this 200-year present. So we are here with all the tools and resources of the legacy that's been given to us, and all of the hope and courage that it will take to build upon our society such that we will be giving the youngest among us the best future they might have. So my Aunt Pearl, who lives in Des Moines now, is 95 years young. My great-grandson is going to be 1 year old in July. So for me, that is my roughly 200-year span. So what have we been given? How can we take the best of that? So much has been built to put us where we are today. And what do we want to leave behind? What can we do now to ensure that we leave behind a legacy that we're proud of? So maybe with this 200-year perspective, 100 back, 100 forward, we can kind of see more clearly. Now, when my Aunt Pearl was growing up on a farm outside Lamoni, after the Depression and the war, she would have watched how oil helped people get access to life-saving technologies and resources never possible before. Whether the personal freedom of vehicles that was created, or the cheap power that triggered an industrial revolution with its explosion of goods and services that helped raise the standard of living within just a few generations. Or the discovery of plastics, which launched inventions that were, they were science fiction just a few years before. Plastics that kept people alive, helped them function with prosthetics or hearing aids, cardiac support, pacemakers. It helped keep food fresher, longer, seeming like that could help address world hunger. Of course, we now are more fully aware of the repercussions of oil, driving climate change. It's overheating the planet. It spawned sinful inequality and obscene excessive consumption. But that doesn't mean that it didn't also do some good. So things get complicated. It isn't always black and white. So here I sit, holding the future 100 years in my great-grandson, knowing that if we continue to invest in fossil fuels the way we have been, we are actually going to condemn him to a horrific future of terrible consequences. Certainly consequences none of us would ever wish upon any of our children, grandchildren, great-grandsons, or great-granddaughters. But we do the best with what we have until we know better. And then hopefully we do better. So I invite you to pause just for a second and think about those who are these people in your life. Who makes up your 100-year past and 100-year future? Keep these people in the back of your mind during the next 10 minutes or so, just as a perspective, as a grounding point. So let's take a quick look at the science that's driving this call for a just transition away from fossil fuels and what divestment is. So a good snapshot is what we call the carbon bubble. The large circle represents the proven known fossil fuel reserves that we could extract and burn. How much fossil fuels we know are still out there that we could go get. Now that smaller blue circle represents the amount of oil we can still burn and still give us a fighting chance to avoid global overheating of 2 degrees centigrade. So for perspective, and for me, gigatons and billions of tons, it's all kind of meaningless. But let's just use the round numbers. The large beige circle, think of that as representing 2,795. Our budget, or how much more we can burn before we hit that 2 degrees, is about 550. So if we consider the Paris Accords, their attempt to stay below 1.5 degrees, then that blue ball shrinks by more than a half to less than 250. So this remaining carbon budget, the maximum amount of fuel we can still burn to still have a fighting chance to remain below 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. It means we have a lot more fossil fuels left than we can extract and burn and still have a future, a sustainable future. And I'm not going to spend time describing how our weather patterns have gone crazy the past few years. I mean, rain bombs that cause annual precipitation falling in a single day, triggering floods of biblical proportions. Larger and more frequent storms, dropping huge amounts of water. Record droughts. And these were going on all over the world. So 2024 was the first year that we brushed up against that 1.5 threshold. And the evidence of the rapidly increasing quantity and magnitude of climate disasters are just a Google away. So in a nutshell, if I am unwilling to condemn my great-grandson and the rest of his brothers and sisters around the world to a lifestyle of constant struggle of survival in the face of massive unpredictability and destabilization, that means 90% of the current oil reserves must remain in the ground. So there's two ways that divestment can instigate change. First is, of course, the financial aspect. The second, and I would suggest is the more important one, is it removes the social license of burning fossil fuels. So if we look at what investment means according to Merriam-Webster, we see one, to commit money in order to earn a financial return. And number two, to furnish with power or authority. So this, again, goes back to saying what our investments do. It does not just give finance. It also gives tacit approval and support to what they're doing, to their business model. So I wonder, how many of you have places that you no longer shop at, or that you avoid, or you're unwilling to frequent with your money? This is a picture of the famous Montgomery bus boycott. I can think of several. So we do this on a personal level all the time, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. And I'm sure there are places that you intentionally frequent to support an establishment because you like them or you like what they're doing. We are voting with our dollars. So often I hear an argument against divestment by people that claim, well, you know, if we sell off our stocks, then that requires another buyer, and then the other buyer probably less ethically inclined than I am, and they're even more committed to the financial success of this company that we don't like. So it isn't actually removing funding, it's just someone else that will be making the money off them, so we're not impacting them anyway. However, we have a unique ability to do this as a faith organization because there's still the power of authority and this morality. The best known example of this was the divestment from apartheid South Africa. Now, this campaign took a while, and the financial impacts were not immediately apparent. But eventually, the financial impacts were felt. And the campaign allowed people and institutions to do two things. First, we sent a clear message to the governments of both the United States, South Africa, Great Britain, Canada. And we said that we do not stand by what was happening. We considered it wrong. And second, it was a creative way for people to discern how to vote with their money and uphold their own dignity and morality by being aware of how their money was being spent. This eventually was impactful and played an important role in ending apartheid. And we can recognize this as in line with our faith, our principles, the worth of all persons. So we become aware of how faith teaching and practice can be impactful if we act. So if we follow the peaceful one, we are called to walk with those on the margins, those who are suffering the most impacts from the systems and structures that are in place, those suffering the most harm from them. And so we are tasked with continuing to walk even in this complex world of today. We want to make sure we are creating a world where God's love is most able to break free. Now, our church has already started on this path, has already implemented socially responsible investment guidelines. So with this resolution, we wish our church to declare that along with other faith organizations, we will consider divestment from those companies that consistently fail to initiate policies intended to achieve the Paris climate goals. And by making that declaration, we set the stage to help revoke that social license, the social acceptance of environmental damage. And look, we all need to do our part. We just shared how some of us have solar, some of us are driving electric vehicles or hybrids. So we can align our own personal actions towards sustainability. We use our own water bottles, heat pumps. Some of us compost. And I can't quote specific numbers, but there are quite a few articles that claim the largest portion of our individual carbon footprints. It's not our furnace, it's not our car, it's not how many steaks we eat, but it's our money, our investments. It's who and how we bank. Now, Bill McKibben, he's a longtime proponent of the planet. He claims that for every $10,000 invested in fossil fuels, that money is generating a month's worth of carbon of the average American. Some claim that every $1,000 in your bank account, if it's invested in fossil fuels, represents the carbon released by a flight from New York to Seattle. So the emissions from your money dwarf the emissions of your daily life. So this is behind the movement to convince individuals to stop doing business with banks and financial institutions that continue to support and fund fossil fuel companies. So just rethink about where you bank. In this graph, between the first and third combined, you're up close to 8, which far outstrips all the other categories. And I'm going to be the first one to tell everybody here that changing banks is a major pain in the keister. It doesn't happen overnight. And there's going to be a lot of people that are unable to for a myriad of reasons of why they can't. But the first step is to be aware of the impact of your money. Who should you avoid? Well, here in the US, the filthy four: Chase, Citi, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. If you bank there, change. But if you can't change, like let's say your Social Security check's going into one of those. Right now in this environment, it'd be scary to make any changes to that right now. I get it. But maybe at least every time you go into the bank, say something to the teller. Say, hey, has Citibank finally stopped funding fossil fuels and trying to kill us all? Canada, they have their oil bankers as well. Again, this resolution does not mandate anyone make changes. It's not a measure of faith or anything like that. It simply asks us to be aware and to do what we can. But first and foremost, be aware. Maybe something easier. Get a green credit card. Like that commercial. What's in your wallet? Change your credit cards. If you can, change your bank. And granted, every little bit helps. Our personal actions are important. But that alone will not bring us to a sustainable future. It's going to take organized systemic change. And thus, as a church, we have a unique opportunity to help apply this moral license and help bring pressure to make the transformation that's needed. By calling on members in congregations and jurisdictions to also divest when we can, to remove their tacit support of companies that fail to act to save our planet, or are intentionally acting to further destroy our sacred home. We further remove the social license. We further remove the social acceptance of practices that rob us of a future. And I won't go into all the reports that demonstrate that divesting from fossil fuels is still a sound financial option. But investment managers today are recognizing the risks of fossil fuel investment as they become aware of the growing rejection of fossil fuels by world governments and populations, mostly outside the United States. But it means they must be on guard so that fossil fuel assets don't get stranded. So looking back through history, it made sense to invest in fossil fuels. It had positive returns, and it was something worth putting our money into in terms of advancing human health and flourishing. And yes, sometimes it still does tend to have positive returns now. But there are strong projections that that will not continue to be so, as more and more people ask, at what cost? In the future, these will be stranded assets as the climate worsens, as more and more people will be impacted by the results of the overuse and abuse of fossil fuels. More and more people are realizing things are not right. More and more people will begin abandoning their stocks in these companies which are driving massive death tolls and the Earth's destruction. Stranded assets. They'll be holding these stocks and there won't be anyone left to buy them. Sort of like, can you imagine owning stock in an asbestos company? All the while knowing that it was killing people and knowing that there were adequate alternatives that don't cause harm. At some point, it's going to fall. And we're going to see this in the fossil fuel industry as well. We've already seen that it's having this shift is already beginning. New York State Pension Fund divested, and they see that it was essential to protect the fund's long-term value to divest. Multiple states are considering a quote, make polluters pay, unquote, laws for the years of deception and failing to admit the harms that the oil industry was well aware of. Fun, when I was involved in some 60,000 Costco members have asked Costco to change their financial partner. The Costco credit card is underwritten by Citibank, one of the top 4 fossil fuel investing banks in the US, one of the filthy 4. Those are human hot dogs, by the way, in case you didn't notice that. But depriving fossil fuels of their social license, their social acceptance, that's how we address the billions and trillions of dollars in government subsidies that collectively all our taxes pay for. And it's staggering how much money is given to the oil industry to help artificially reduce the cost of oil, which in turn exacerbates our addiction to oil. And in the United States alone, estimates of what our oil subsidies could pay for is mind-boggling. The University of Bath did a study of 10,000 youth aged 16 to 25 across 10 countries about the climate crisis. 75% of these youth said that the future is frightening. 55.7%, over half, said they thought humanity is doomed. This should be a wake-up call, at least for Christians. We believe, just this past week, Holy Week, we claim we believe in a Lord who died and came back to life. So if we talk about what does doom mean? What does hope mean? We're the ones who hold a certain element of the ability to speak of morality, of truth. That's very, very powerful. And so we can say that divesting from fossil fuels is, in fact, living out Jesus's mission statement from the book of Luke. What will the world we leave look like? At this moment, at the crux of our 200-year present, we're just now brushing up against 1.5 degrees of temperature rise. Look at the black spots, the places that already are made uninhabitable by climate disruption. And at this level of climate disruption, we see tens of millions of people that are displaced because they simply cannot live in their homelands anymore. If we sit on the sidelines, less than 50 years from now, the uninhabitable zones will spread across the earth like a plague. And we will see billions of people become climate refugees. A Catholic cardinal, Joseph Tobin, he's the Archbishop of Newark, summed it up quite nicely. He said, "The faith community, with its vast reach and moral authority, has a pivotal role to play in engendering the kind of change we need to see. When our children and grandchildren look back at this moment, they will judge us by our actions and decisions as people of faith. We must rise to the occasion, ensuring that our legacy is one of unity, pursuing shared prosperity and equality, an unwavering commitment to the preservation of our common home. So as we gaze both ways of our 200-year present, 100 up, 100 down, and we ask ourselves, what does the earth ask of us? What is at stake is our own dignity. Leaving an inhabitable planet to future generation is first and foremost up to us. Now, we can do nothing and tacitly approve and support companies and activities that many acknowledge are actively destroying our common home, actively destroying the sacred creation entrusted to us. Or we can declare our faith, declare our intent to divest, to remove our support, remove our social license from those seeking profit over people, to make the destruction of God's creation socially repugnant, socially unacceptable. Our faith cannot be separated from the science, from the world around us, and certainly cannot be passive in the face of the destruction of God's creation. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. I appreciate that view of what it means to divest. And we do actually have a few moments now to consider comments and questions. And we already have one that I think is extremely important that I'm going to refer to you, Paul, and then we'll go to yours, Alice. How do you get a green credit card? What is the process? Where do we go to get a green credit card? And what would you suggest are the steps for doing that?
Well, first I'll make a short confession. My entire working career was tied deeply intertwined with the fossil fuel industry. So I am a reformed gearhead. I also traveled a lot, so I had an American Airlines credit card. So with the miles I've accumulated over the years, giving up my American Airlines credit card, which was put out by Citibank, was tough. You get used to getting those miles. But I felt I could not talk about this without at least taking some steps myself. And you can simply Google green credit cards. There's several banks who actually in their mission statements say that they will not invest in fossil fuels. There are several banks who go a step further and actively pursue investments in green technologies. They kind of like, we want to help as opposed to do no harm. But I think there's a couple, there's green.bank.org. But you can simply Google fossil-free credit cards, or fossil-free banks, and you can get a whole list of different ones.
Are there drawbacks to getting a green credit card?
You
Other
don't
than
get,
losing your miles, of course.
you don't get frequent flyer miles.
Right.
Other than that, there's really nothing for free. Everything, there's a cost involved. So I don't really think about it, so I don't really miss it, I guess.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have Alice with a question.
First of all, thank you. I never thought about banks being a issue. And I also think it helps not only to not do business with these companies, but to bring attention to the companies that are doing good. Price Chopper has plant-based plastic bags. And I don't see it advertised anywhere. I found that out when I went in there. And I think I think it would be helpful if we thank them and get a hold of them, and I mean, and bring it, plaster it on Facebook, whatever, but bring attention to the fact when they're doing good. That might encourage more to do good, hopefully.
Thank you. Rod, would you like to tell us about the URLs you've put in the chats?
As soon as I get them in the chat,
Oh,
you hit return, and of course it doesn't go to a new line, it just shoots it off. So, but
of
I
course.
will get it in there, don't worry. But well, I guess while I'm on, I'd like to quickly say I've been exploring this issue for like almost 2.5 decades at least. It started off with the green investments. Now this is back in the 90s. And to be honest, I didn't invest because I thought, I'm not sure. I think it's too early. And it was. They disappeared because they could not make the investment. They could not make good interest off the investment. But now, oh yes, there is no trouble in terms of investing your money. The key is to make sure you have someone knowledgeable, an advisor who knows, or a bank that knows the issues. I don't have a pension, so when I retired, the money I've got, it better outlast me or I'm in trouble. But I have no qualms about investing in, as Paul is mentioning, or even the broader topic of just ESG, sustainable and governance, good governance funds. They do now have the experience that you can make as good an investment choice and interest, and keep your capital and all that. They're basically on par with those who are, who are on the dirty side of things. So I just wanted to leave you with that. Make sure you do your homework, but if you do, yes, you can do fine. Now, give me a minute. I'll go back and get those URLs in.
Thank you so much, Rod. And Paul, I'm going to put you on the spot again. You didn't mention specifically insurance companies. Can you comment on insurance companies and their investments, divestment issues?
Well, that's going to be the next big battle. There's a lot of people protesting the banks, but the insurance companies, they get the hat trick. They invest in the fossil fuels that drive the climate change, that in turn makes areas uninhabitable, so they can either drive up the rates and charge us more insurance rates because of the climate change that their investments are fueling. So yeah, that's going to be the next. At the next conference, we'll probably have a resolution on insurance companies and on plastics. It's all part of the picture, but you can only take so many bites at one time.
And are there green insurance companies? I haven't heard of any.
I have yet to hear of any as well.
Yeah.
Other than if there's insurance companies that are nonprofit.
Oh,
So
okay.
what we need is an insurance where people band together for the common good instead of to make shareholders wealthier and wealthier. But
that's what's happening in Africa and some of the Caribbean islands, where the local people are banding together to provide insurance for one another. Yeah.
Me too.
That's kind of back to the basics. Okay, are there comments in the chats that we need to? We only have like a minute or two left. I think what I'll do is just ask you to look at the chats. You can take photographs of those URL codes, or you can copy those onto a sheet of paper. You can also copy the entire chat by going to 3 dots, and it has a place where it says copy the chat. Okay, and that just downloads it to your computer. All right. I think I'm not seeing any hands raised right now. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Lori for our last presentation and closing. Thank you, Lori.
Oh, actually, we got another question.
Oh, we do? Where's that?
Sort of fourth from the top.
Thank you, Rod.
Well, I'll just really comment really quickly. You know, the people that are still activating, they're still drill baby drill. They have a vested interest in the investment of oil. There's a personal investment there, and they are valuing profit over people. There's no question that it's destructive. And, you know, the people that do that, we have to lessen their voice. On developing countries, there's, you know, it's kind of like cell phones. AT&T 20 years ago said, well, how many cell phones will there be? Oh, there's going to be, you know, 500,000 or maybe 1 million. Well, within a couple of years, there were over 1 billion, because in a lot of the parts of the world where they did not already have the copper telephone infrastructure, it was simply cheaper and more effective to use cell phones than to string phone lines. And it's the same with oil. Almost all of the new fossil fuel infrastructure investment is in Africa. And if we put in pipelines and we make more countries dependent on fossil fuels in Africa, it's just going to keep them tethered to a monopoly so that they can never break free. If we instead help them invest in renewable energy, they have sun and they have wind. If we develop that instead of developing pipelines, they have the adequate power and they're free to enjoy it instead of being under the thumb of a fossil fuel monopoly.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are out of time. So Lori, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Paul, for an excellent presentation. Very informative.
So my friends, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So as we now come to the moment of wrapping up this spring series of webinars where we've been exploring a just transition that leaves no one behind, I wanted to take just a moment to acknowledge the passing of this amazing human being and faith leader who embodied the very integration of social, economic, and environmental justice, the drive, the insistence that we need systems change through his tenure as a faith leader. So I just want us to take this moment. I know that at Easter Monday morning, less than a week ago, the world woke up to the shocking news of his passing. This is what happened for me. I saw it. I went, oh no! There was this strong wave of loss and and a sense of despair. And my doggy friend that I'm sitting with right now came over to me and she put her paw up on my knee. And she did that little half-mast wag, you know, that dogs will do when they know something's wrong, and gave me her full attention. Having spent much of this spring thinking about, reading about, dreaming about, and trying to envision a just transition from a fossil fuel economy to a sustainable economy based on renewable energy, Francis's loss somehow hit me surprisingly hard. I think it's a loss that takes place within a cascading series of losses and unraveling that many of us are feeling as we meet the challenges of the times we live in. Desperate for faith-based leadership in a world that seems to be spinning out of control. At first, it was a moment where another one of the wisest among us was leaving. But in the end, his life and his work renews our own call to be faith leaders in our own contexts, as small or as medium-sized or as large or not as they might be. So I'm going to end up probably leaving a fair amount of this presentation out, but I did want to just name Laudato Si as his landmark encyclical on climate change and inequality, brought together what we've been doing with this concept of a just transition, bringing them together to say that they are inextricable and not separable. Laudato Si means praise be to you. It's drawn directly from Francis of Assisi's Canticle of the Creatures, which is the fourth runner of our beloved All Creatures of Our God and King. With this encyclical that was published in 2015, it may have been the first time in which, in a systemic way, a world leader linked climate change, necessary changes in our behavior, to the care for the poor, and especially the global poor. He said, many things have to change course, but it is we human beings above all who need to change. And with that statement, there's no wonder that his encyclical engendered so much resistance. 2 years ago, he came out with a follow-up apostolic exhortation called Laudate Deum, which I just want to notice that, like the prophet in our church who told us 53 years ago we should be at the forefront, we need reminding. So here was the impact of Laudato Si. I remember it causing quite a stir at the time, says Climate One commentator Greg Dalton. And listen to see if this is familiar with what we've been talking about for the last 3 webinars. The Pope's message took aim at our culture of consumerism, took aim at the devaluing of nature. He called for the world to move away from coal and oil without delay, and he also took a swing at unfettered capitalism and technology, calling them out as root causes of an ecological and moral crisis. What I really want to do, although I'm probably going to skip a part of this, is just recognize that On Care for Our Common Home, which is the subtitle, I'll just have to leave this as a little bit of a teaser. It is actually the original definition of what economy means. So I wanted to, the part I'm just going to go really quickly through here is just the power of this little word home, which is oikos in Greek, which is the common root for eco, which means home or household. An ecosystem are the relationships of home, and an economy is simply the stewardship or care or management of our home. Doesn't sound like the adversarial economy of our dominant culture these days that sets it up as if we can't do climate work because we might lose some wealth. For our common home becomes an invitation to a new kind of economy. And I just want to recognize quickly here that the speaker of this particular lecture series goes on to say the things we think of as economy are just elements or measures of our particular kind of economy, but we are all participating in different kinds of economies all the time, whether or not they're valued by the dominant economy or not. Many of our communities have thriving economies that either exist alongside or instead of the dominant extractive economies. We all do it every day, all the time. Whenever we drop what we're doing to help a sick friend, don't get our script written because we take someone to church that we really wanted to help out, saw someone who needed help crossing the street, decided to think about maybe divesting from certain investments that might be particularly harmful for the planet. Trading, bartering, sharing our tools, choosing to consume less. These are radical economic acts based on care for our common home. And even though they don't supersede our dominant economy, we can participate in them in small ways. I'm going to just not mention that. We'll have to, as a teaser, I just want to recognize that we can seed systemic change as we create intentional communities. Even in a world that's falling apart, every time we take these acts of caring for our common home, being together in intentional community, practicing ecologically viable economies with generosity, gratitude, and responsible choices, we're seeding the future. We are envisioning the future we want. I have been joking recently quite a bit about the fact that I think we may have given up the LDS moniker a little bit too soon. It feels like the latter days to me. I said that to a friend the other day who actually I think is on this call, who reminded me instead that came right back and said, isn't it amazing that we chose our identity around community of Christ just in time? Who we are as a faith community, community of Christ, not only envisions the world we want and to which we have been called, it also names the path we must take as we move forward. Over and over again, I keep reading all these things that say, here's the first suggestion. You have to be in community together. You have to widen your community. You need to turn to friends and neighbors. You need to pay attention to the wisdom of the past, of people of all colors who have way more experience at some of the changes we need to pursue. So finally, here is what we want to say. Climate action is a faith thing, and we're going to be talking a lot more about this at conference. Over and over again, this revolution that either Pope Francis set off or was speaking to and helped carry forward is taking root. We are changing. We are speaking now as persons who recognize that it's not working if all we're trying to do is just have a transition. It's simply not working. We've been speaking as if a transition without regard to issues of economic, social, and racial justice is equally viable to a just transition, but it's simply not the case anymore. Environmentalism of the 20th century tended to set these ecological justice and social economic justice up as a false dichotomy. We've been exploring, and there's a lot more for us to do next webinar season. But it is simply the case that without a just transition, it may be that there will be no transition at all. So it is time for us as leaders of all faiths, of our faiths, to gather in community. And so I want to invite you real quickly to, trying to find the right slide here. Join us at World Conference. We're going to have a climate booth. We would love to see you. We would love to hear your climate stories. We put our heads together and crafted a postcard that has a Doctrine and Covenants scripture on the back that we're going to have copies of if you happen to be someone who likes to contact representatives about things that are on your heart. We have a newly designed T-shirt that says climate action is a faith thing. And we don't know the day yet, But this is the title of our Lunch and Learn, to let all life flourish, climate action is a faith thing. So we will continue this exploration. And in the meantime, we just want to thank all of you for being the leaders, the climate leaders in your own context, who are wanting to stay true to that seal that we have of a child leading domestic animals and wild animals and ecosystems, complexes of relationship forward into a sustainable future. So thank you for being with us through this spring series, and we will see you at conference. And if we don't see you at conference, send us your climate stories anyway. We want to hear them.